Do you want to know how to stop making last-minute changes to your event content? Whether you're an event planner or an event producer who has lost some sleep over last-minute changes, maybe the night or the day of, or maybe even 10 minutes before your doors open, well, I'm an event producer and I'm going to break down a couple tips that I have for you so that you can make sure that your clients are hitting their deadlines and you're walking in with a little bit better idea of what your event content looks like before you get on site. Before we jump into it, I'm Logan Clements. I'm a freelance event producer based in Seattle, Washington, but I execute events here and all over the world. I do want to remind you to like, subscribe, turn on that little notification bell so you get notified every single Monday when I drop new videos. I'm also the co-host of the Better Events podcast with fellow event pro Mary Davidson. We drop even more episodes all about event production, event content, anything event related, you name it. We go more in depth in about 35 minutes. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. So why is it so important that you stop making last minute changes? This is something that I have to tell clients time and time again because I have found that often no matter how many months or weeks you have to plan your event, you are going to have changes. And I guess I should caveat first, I understand that 0 changes is almost impossible at any event, but I do think there is some kind of framework that you can put in mind to try to reduce the amount of changes that come in at that 11th hour, because anytime you're making changes last minute, you're really putting your show at risk. And I know that because I have from experience had a speaker make last minute changes to their slides, and it really wasn't the speaker, it was their team. They were executive leader. They changed this person's slides maybe 10 minutes before they were supposed to go on stage, after we had already done a rehearsal. And I did call it out and I said, does this speaker know you've made these changes? And they said, yes, it'll be fine. Well, we get on stage. This speaker, while in their session, is like, well, I don't know what this slide means, so let's keep it moving, and literally skip the slide. And I can't lie to you that the person next to me was pretty horrified from his team that was like, oh my gosh, that was embarrassing. But also I swear he knew, because it tripped him up because it was something that we hadn't rehearsed. I also think there's always an issue with potentially a video not playing or something not being loaded correctly because you rushed it to get it in with the correct information and it broke something else, or a font's not right. And so this is something I almost always try to start these conversations months ahead of time, or at least a month ahead of the event, because I understand that getting that event content is not as easy as just give me the slides or give me the content. It sometimes has to go through a legal department, sometimes a design team. There are multiple steps, so you can't really, even the week of your event saying, hey, I need the slides by Friday, might throw off some of those people. So my first tip for how you can implement this is to set a deadline and keep to it. The number of people I've worked with who are like, we set a deadline, we do it every year, and yet everybody knows we will always accept things late, and so they're not actually setting it. It's more like it's a nice to have that they're like, oh, we are aspiring to have this deadline, but everybody, all the speakers involved, all the stakeholders know it's not a real deadline, so therefore it's not a real deadline. And so make sure you set a deadline. I always encourage you to set it a couple days earlier because yes, you want to have some wiggle room, but ideally 80 to 90% of your speakers are providing their content by that deadline, and you're only chasing the 10 to 20%. So make sure you set that deadline. For me, I often like to have it be the week before the event. It doesn't need to go through, again, legal, design, or anything like that if you're just taking your speaker's content. But having it, if the event's on a Thursday, maybe I want it by that Friday the week before. Then the important part here is you need to set reminders. You are checking in with your client. This is where, as a producer, this is one of the producer hat roles we have, is checking in on that deadline. How is it tracking? How are the people doing? I've had with some of my clients, because sometimes being in a third-party role of not being an internal person who works for the company or the organization, I'm able to kind of come in as that third party and say, loop me an email. I'm happy to chase your speakers for you. I'm happy to be that person that you can cite to say, here's why we need it so early. But you want to set those reminders. And then lock your content. This is a different deadline than what I was just talking about giving to speakers. There is a date that you should be saying to your client, this is when we need to lock the content. And when I have some bigger clients that have big budgets and I want to be flexible and I want to be their yes person, even to them, we've been talking about, we really need to have this content locked the night before. And why is that so important? So that we can rehearse it, so we can check it, so we can make sure all the slides work, all the builds work, any animations, anything that works. If we are making changes the morning of, there's a risk involved with that. Now, whenever I have that conversation with them about locking content, I do ask, are there people that you are comfortable making the exception to that rule? Maybe they have a keynote speaker who will never give them their slides the night before and is always going to show up 15 minutes before their keynote talk with that USB drive and their slides. Sure, but that's an external keynote speaker, and I feel like some event organizers are a little bit more comfortable if something doesn't work. They understand that that's just part of it. But is there anybody you want to last minute fit in a video from? And you can make exceptions to it, but my approach is always eyes wide open. Let's not pretend as event production teams and AV companies that you can give me something 5 minutes before it's supposed to go live and I can guarantee it's going to work. That's not a thing. That's not possible. And so I don't want to then pretend that way to clients. And I encourage more people to do that, is just be honest with what your capabilities are and what your timelines actually are. Last and important question that I get a lot is and then what do you do when someone asks to make changes? So I will often say, if I'm making changes in a deck, let's say a PowerPoint presentation, we've already loaded it on site, our tech team has it. I will say if it's deleting a bullet point or changing a word and I personally can do it right now, or our graphics operator right now can just make that change, let's do it. If it's adding a couple slides or deleting or adding a video last minute, that's again that conversation with my client of, is this worth it for this person? Is it worth risking something, having to reload something and it not working for this person? And they have to let me know yes or no. And then there are some times when I just have to look at my client and I have to look at them and say, it's not possible at this point. But also talking through it, sometimes those last minute little needs like that, they aren't that important. Adding that one slide that says that one call to action that you're like, we can drop it in the chat or have your MC verbally say it. It's not worth risking all of the content on your screens with that amount of last minuteness. And now my final point to you is more of a plea, I guess, to any event hosts and content folks out there is please set deadlines and get your content in early. The number of shows that get delayed on site for our tech time, our rehearsal time, because we are waiting on content for someone, or we're rehearsing with content that completely changes, the next day for the event. There's time better spent. And a big thing with our events shows I know we get is a lot of that budgets are tight, resources are not there as much, so you really don't want to have any waste. And one way to really set your AV team up for success, to make the most of their setup time, their load-in time, their execution and rehearsal time, is going to be that they have all the assets downloaded in hand on a drive, on a thumb drive, somewhere when they walk on site, and that you're not actively handing them things as they're getting set up, because you never know, waiting on that video, that could impact their setup. So changes happen. We definitely understand it. And if you work with me as a producer, you'll know that I love to be flexible and make it work. But I also am someone who's going to have those conversations as we get closer and closer to the event. And I have had a client give me updated slides 10 minutes before the event started. And yes, we did use them. And yes, it was fine in that one case. But it is so important to talk about these things and make sure you have these backup plans of what you're going to do, and not just assume that we all understand just how much effort it takes, because unfortunately, I think a lot of people think when they walk up with that USB of content and they hand it to you, that that's going to be the easiest thing that you have to do that day, and don't understand that for event producers and graphics operators everywhere, our stomach drops because it's very stressful to not know exactly what content we're having to reload or redo. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you just definitely need to have a good communication plan. Well, that's all I have for you folks. I'm Logan Clements. I'm a freelance event producer based in Seattle, Washington, but I execute events here and all over the world. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.